So for any of you out there that are new to the IT industry or new to technology, you may be thinking to yourself, what is a backup? Well, simply put, a backup is a copy of important data or information that is created and stored in a separate location, typically on a different device or media. The purpose of a backup is to protect against data loss or corruption due to things like hardware failure, software errors, malware, accidental deletion, theft, natural disasters, to name a few. In today's digital age where most of our personal and professional information is stored electronically, backups have become an essential component of data management and security. Without backups, losing important data can have severe consequences, such as financial loss, legal liabilities, intellectual property loss, or reputational damage. In section 2, we're going to be covering the different types of backups, but to name a few, there are full backups, incremental backups, differential backups, application backups, forward and reverse backups, synthetic backups, so you can see we've got quite a lot of learning ahead of us. Backups can be run for something as simple as an application on a device to applications on dedicated servers and in some cases dedicated hardware used specifically for backups themselves. We're going to be covering all of this throughout the course, so I hope you're as excited as I am. Now the wheels are probably already turning in your head and you're starting to think about what you should be backing up. And we're going to cover a lot of that in this course. We're going to be looking at what type of data do you need to be considering backing up in your business. For example, we're going to be looking at the different applications and services your business may use. We're going to be looking at the workstations that your staff are going to be on, the servers that they're going to be using. We're going to be looking at different cloud platforms out there. So for example, we will look at Office 365 and Google Workspaces. To ensure the effectiveness of backups, it's essential to follow best practice guides. So best practices are sort of the rules and guidelines put out into the industry that you should be doing your best to follow because it's tried and tested to make sure that your organization is going to be safe. We're going to be covering the backup best practices throughout all sections. So when I'm trying to explain the topic, I am going to be talking about what that best practice may look like for the different industries out there. And this can include things like how regular your backups are, the type of testing that you do to ensure that that data can be restored, encryption to protect that sensitive data, and how to keep multiple copies of backups in different locations to ensure you're always protected. The risks of not having a backup can be significant, and they depend on the type of data that is lost and the context of which the loss occurs. Now, I don't know how many of you out there have ever been working on a document and you thought you saved it, but you didn't, and you've had to restart it from scratch, maybe throughout going through school or maybe going through university or in a workplace environment. These type of things can have detrimental effects to you and your time. And it's possible that what you lost was only one document. Multiply that by all the documents that your business or organization uses and think about the impact that that would have. When we look into specifics of some of the risks of not having a backup, here are a few. The first is that permanent data loss. So without a backup, data that is lost due to hardware failure or malware or any other causes may be permanently lost. This loss can be more than just detrimental to your business's financial needs. It could also put you in a bit of legal trouble, which we're going to look at specifically in section 4. You could lose intellectual property. So businesses that rely on intellectual property, such as patents, trademarks, or trade secrets, are at risk of losing valuable assets if data is lost. This could not only damage your company's reputation, it could damage the customer trust, it could damage your sales, and your business growth and competitive advantage over the other businesses in your industry. There could be a major disruption to your operations. So by losing critical data, it can disrupt or cause delays and result in those financial losses. For example, if a customer's customer database is lost, it may be difficult to contact customers and conduct business with them. If you lost your website, for example, you may not be generating new revenue until you can get it back up and running, which is time consuming and costly. And for something as major as ransomware, where someone comes in, encrypts all your data and demands a ransom from you in order to unencrypt that data, your business may never fully recover from that. You know, it's generally known within the industry that even if you pay the ransom, there is no guarantee they're going to return that data to you. So you've always got to be prepared for these type of situations. Many businesses are required to store certain types of data for legal or compliance reasons. Losing this data can result in legal liabilities, regulatory fines, and more reputational damage. So in summary, the risks of not having a backup can be severe and have significant consequences for businesses and individuals alike. It's essential to have a backup strategy in place to protect against this data loss and mitigate the potential risks. Fortunately, that's where this course comes in. We're going to be covering everything we just looked at in much more detail throughout the course, and it's going to hopefully give you a better understanding of what you need to be thinking about when you're looking at a backup strategy plan. In conclusion, backups are an essential tool in modern data management and security. By creating copies of important data, backups provide a safety net against data loss or corruption due to various reasons. With the increasing amount of data we create and store every single day, it is essential to have those reliable backup strategies in place to ensure the continuity of our digital lives. In the next lecture, I'm going to be talking about the 3-2-1-1-0 rule, which is generally known as being one of the best practices you can follow in the industry today. So I'll see you there. Alrighty, with all of the introductions and everything out of the way, it's time for us to start looking more in depth into backup and disaster recovery, starting off with the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. So what is the 3-2-1-1-0 rule? Well, it's a simple and effective guideline for backing up data. It consists of the following ideas. You should have 3 copies of your data on 2 different storage mediums, one of which is offsite, one of which is air-gapped with 0 errors. Now, if you're looking at that and not really understanding it, don't worry, we're going to cover that off in much more detail. So starting off with the 3 copies of your data, what does that mean? Well, it means that you should have 3 copies of your data stored in different locations. One of those copies is always going to be stored on the primary device or storage medium. So let's say, for example, on your workstation. While the other 2 copies should be stored on separate devices or media. This ensures that you have that level of redundancy in case one or more copy is lost or corrupted. Moving on to 2 different storage mediums, this means that you should use 2 different types of storage mediums for your backups, such as an external hard drive and a cloud-based backup service. This ensures that your data is protected against hardware failures or any issues that may affect a singular type of medium storage. When we talk about offsite backup, that means a physically different location from where that data is currently stored. This could be a secure location or in a cloud-based backup service, just somewhere that isn't in the same vicinity as that current copy of data. Having an offsite backup ensures that your data is protected against things like natural disasters, theft, or any events that may affect your primary location. Carrying data offsite can be done in many different ways, such as physically. So if you were to copy some data to an external hard drive and take that to the bank and put it in a safe, technically that is an offsite copy. You can do it over site-to-site VPNs, you can do it over your MPLS or SD-WAN networks, or you can even replicate it over the public internet. When we talk about one air-gapped backup, there are kind of 2 different meanings to this. The first one, air-gapped can mean offline copy. So a copy of data that is not on a network, that is not connected to the internet in any way, that is essentially protecting you from any sort of threats that are going to come through those networks. Alternatively, an air-gapped backup can also be an immutable copy. So immutability means that this copy cannot be modified in any way under any circumstances. There are server operating systems and cloud providers out there that basically once you write that data onto their platforms, it can be changed for a certain period of time that you define. So for example, if the data got copied up there and you set a 14-day immutability period, that data cannot be deleted, modified, or changed in any way for that 14 days. And this is to sort of complement that offsite backup. If you're doing an offsite backup over a VPN and they're all on the same domain, all your infrastructure is on the same domain, you're not really protecting that data, because if there was someone that maliciously entered your network through that VPN, they could still have access to your backups. This literal air gap helps to ensure effective disaster recovery when an incident occurs. It offers full protection from things like crypto lockers or ransomware, malicious hackers, internal saboteurs, and provides organizations with a protection of their data. A common story in the IT industry today, when businesses are getting breached, hackers have learned that businesses won't likely pay a ransom if they have backups. They'll just go and restore that data from the backups and continue operating with that period of downtime that they suffered. So what hackers are doing is they're actively targeting the backups as well to either encrypt those or to completely wipe them, ensuring that you have no way but to try and pay that ransom, which, as I previously stated, is not a guarantee you're going to get that data back anyway, and in certain countries is even illegal to do. And lastly, the zero errors means that you should always ensure that your backups are error-free. Regularly testing those backups to make sure you can restore the data is essential for making sure that in a disaster, you can rely on them. This ensures that your data and your business is fully protected and you can rely on your backups in case of a data loss situation. Now, something important about the 32110 rule is there used to be another one called the 321 rule, which was simply to have 3 copies of your data on 2 different storage mediums, one of which is offsite. The industry started to feel that that wasn't protection enough, because you can have those situations where a hacker breaches your organization and destroys both the physical copies and the offsite copies. So that adding of the extra 1 and the extra 0 is always going to ensure that you have the proper protection you need for your business and organization. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of real world examples of what the 32110 rule may look like. First off, over on the left hand side, let's say we've got a file server with all of your company's data and files on it. You have a network attached storage device in your office, both connected to the same network, and every hour you're running some sort of backup software that copies the backups onto the NAS in an incremental fashion. So we'll cover off what incremental backups are in a later section, but for now, just understand that they're essentially backups that occur frequently and write the new data that has changed since the last backup. So this here covers that you've got that data on 2 different storage mediums. You've got that live copy on the file server and you've got another copy on the NAS. Now, if we head on down to the cloud provider, let's say you've signed up for some sort of cloud service, or maybe the backup software you're using on that file server has this capability. You are once a day copying all of those changes across to the cloud provider. You've then set a 14-day immutability period, so that data cannot be modified in the cloud. So for the 3 copies of your data, you've got 1 on the file server, 1 on the NAS, and 1 on the cloud. You've got it on 2 different storage mediums, so in fact you've got it on 3 there. You're meeting that 1 is offsite rule, so you've got the offsite backup happening once a day. You're meeting the air-gapped requirement because you have immutability on that data for 14 days. So for 14 days, that data cannot be modified or changed. And in order to meet the zero errors rule, you would simply have to set up some sort of either automated or manual task for you to be frequently checking that data to make sure you can restore from it. Now let's say the cloud platform that you use doesn't offer immutability for some reason. Well, another example of the 32110 rule could look like this. So you've got the file server still doing hourly backups to the NAS, you're still doing your daily remote backups to the offsite provider, but because they don't offer immutability, you're lacking that air gapping best practice. So what you could do is you could set up an external hard drive rotation and connect it to the NAS. So at any one time, one of these external hard drives is connected and the other is taken off-site. So maybe to some sort of storage safe or some sort of protected environment where you know that data is going to be safe. Now, there are a couple of downsides to doing this. Obviously, this is more prone to human error. So if, for example, people stop doing this external hard drive rotation, which is, a manual process, you're going to potentially lose that air gapping. You could also have a situation where, you have to bring the external hard drive on site to swap it off with this other one. And that means at any point in time, you're going to have both of those hard drives in the same physical location. If there's some sort of incident there, you could lose that. And of course, this is just one of the many different scenarios that you could come up with to meet that 32110 rule. And many backup vendors and backup hardware providers out there are going to be providing you the solutions that you need in order to meet this for your environment. Now that we've got a better understanding of the 32110 rule and why it's a really good principle to follow, in the next lecture, we're going to be looking at recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives and what they mean. If you want to do some further learning about the 32110 rule, I highly recommend you go out there and do some research on the different vendors that provide the solutions and how they provide that solution. It is really fascinating reads, and there are some really interesting videos from those vendors out there that you can watch, and it talks all about their product and how they're meeting these 32110 rules. But that's it for this lecture. As we wrap up, I hope you have got a fundamental understanding of why it's so important to have those offsite copies, to have those air gap copies, to have 3 copies, to have them on 2 different storage mediums, and to always be testing for those zero errors. Alrighty, it's time for us to look at recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives, otherwise known as RPO and RTO. This is the terminology you're going to hear me use a lot throughout the course because of their absolute importance to the backup and disaster recovery plan. So let's dive in and take an in-depth look at what these are. So your RPO, or recovery point objective, refers to the amount of data that an organization can afford to lose in the event of a disaster. Essentially, RPO is a measurement of how much data an organization is willing to lose in the event of a disaster before it becomes unacceptable. This ties in heavily to the backup schedule, which we're going to be looking at in the section 4. Some examples of RPO may be if your backup software is running on the hour every hour, and your workstation was to fail completely at 10:59 AM, this means you have essentially lost 59 minutes of work and 59 minutes of data that you're not going to be able to recover from that backup, since the last backup would have been at 10 AM. Another example is if you're manually copying your data from your laptop documents folder to an external hard drive at the end of every day, and you go ahead and spill, you've got your 5th coffee of the day at 4 PM and you spill it on your laptop and it completely fries the hard drive, then you're going to think to yourself, well, I've essentially lost a full day's worth of work. So RPOs are extremely important to consider how much data loss your business is willing to lose and how much data you're willing to have to redo in the case you have to restore from backups. The RTO, on the other hand, or recovery time objective, refers to the amount of time that an organization can afford to be without access to its data or systems in the event of a disaster. It's essentially a measurement of how quickly an organization needs to recover its data and systems in the event of a disaster. You know, if we go back and look at those two examples that we just gave on RPO, so, you know, you've got your workstation running on the hour every hour, you know, and your workstation was to completely fail, what you would need to do is you would need to pop down to the shop, buy a new workstation, come back and use that backup software to restore everything onto it. So that trip to the shop may take you 2 hours. You've got to come back, get the PC all set up, go through the first time boot, install the backup software, restore all of the data, which could take a couple of hours. If you're okay to lose those couple of hours of work time to get everything back up and running, then that's your recovery time objective. When we start looking at grander scales or enterprise scales, having operations down for long periods of time is really going to affect your business. So that's where they may have much shorter and much lower recovery time objectives than your small or your medium business. If we take a look at another example, because I think examples are definitely the best way to kind of firm that understanding of RPOs and RTOs, is let's say you've got a server and you're storing all the backups in the cloud. Okay, you're not meeting the 32110 rule and you're just storing the data straight up into the cloud, and it totals about 1 terabyte worth. If you've only got a 100 megabit download internet connection, then the best case scenario is you aren't going to get back up and running for at least 24 hours if you were to be affected by some sort of malware or some sort of ransomware situation. That's because to download 1 terabyte of data from the cloud over 100 megabit is going to take a lot of time, plus the time for you to then restore all of that server infrastructure from the backup software. However, if you're keeping a copy of the backups on premises as well, meeting that 32110 rule, then you could be back up and running in a few hours, because downloading over a local area network compared to downloading over the internet is much faster. You know, in a local area network, you've got gigabit connections between switches and devices, or even 10 gigabit in certain situations if you're running that sort of network infrastructure. So that's why it's important to have those different availabilities to you. You know, you should really only be restoring from the cloud if it's absolutely necessary. And you definitely need to have some sort of plan there as to how you would do it. You know, maybe you could call up your internet provider and they offer speed packs, so increase the amount of speed that you're running for a day or two. Maybe you've got somewhere else that you can download that data from. Maybe over 24 hours is completely fine with you, and in the situation where you do need to restore from the cloud, that's just how it's going to be. Some important considerations for RPO and RTO when designing a backup disaster recovery strategy may look like this. The RPO and RTO targets will help determine the type of backup solution that is needed, as well as the frequency of backups and the level of redundancy that is required for your organization. For example, if an organization has an RPO of 1 hour and an RTO of 4 hours, it will need a backup solution that is capable of backing up data at least once per hour and recovering that within 4 hours in the event of a disaster. These RPO and RTO targets may require additional technologies and strategies such as replication, clustering, failover, many of which we're going to cover throughout the course. So in summary, RPO and RTO are critical considerations when designing a backup and disaster recovery strategy, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about them throughout the course. As we wrap this section up, I hope now you've got a better understanding about what backups are, why they're so important, a bit about the 32110 rule. You have a greater understanding of recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives, and all of that is going to help as we dive into the next section, where we're going to be looking at the types of backups in the industry. Hey, and thanks for joining me again. In this section, we're going to be looking at the different types of backups available in the IT industry and a bit of an in-depth look at what each one does. Of course, when we're talking about backups, we have to start with the full backup, which we'll dive into now. So a full backup is a complete backup of all data that needs to be backed up. This means all files, folders, data on a given system or device are copied to a backup storage medium. Full backups are the most comprehensive and time-consuming backup method, as they require copying all data from the source to the backup destination. So a full backup may look like taking a backup of all the folders and files on a system, or it may involve taking a snapshot of that entire system, all its settings, all its applications and everything, and backing that up onto the storage medium. When we look at when are backups performed, they're typically performed either once off or periodically, such as once a week or once a month, depending on the backup schedule and the amount of data being backed up. One thing I'm going to try and drive home in this course is there are so many different ways to be doing backups dependent on your industry and dependent on your data needs. So hopefully we can give you the tools to just understand what each of these are so that you can go and make your own assessment for your environment. So full backups are